On this Monday night, Russian missiles strike a mall in central Ukraine. The crowded building bombed. And President Zelensky's pleas to G7 leaders as his nation's culture is caught in the crosshairs.
It's about Russians' idea that Ukrainian identity does not exist.
The final days of abortion services in Tennessee.
It's healthcare and it should be accessible.
What the state's lawmakers are now being urged to do, preparing for partiers and protesters, the fears of what could happen on Canada Day in the nation's capital.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin in central Ukraine, where scores of civilians are feared dead after 2 Russian missiles struck a busy shopping mall. Images from the scene show giant plumes of black smoke, the shopping center engulfed in flames. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says the number of victims is impossible to imagine, citing reports more than 1,000 civilians were inside at the time. The mall is in an industrial city in central Ukraine, far away from the epicenter of Russia's war, which has recently been focused on the eastern Donbas region. Russia is stepping up its strikes across Ukraine. Yesterday, rockets were fired into residential neighborhoods in Kyiv. Today, Volodymyr Zelenskyy underscored the urgency of improving Ukraine's military might to world leaders, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at the G7 summit in Germany. Our political correspondent David Akin is there. David?
Well, Nitu, the Ukrainian president was at an undisclosed location in Ukraine and beamed in virtually to have a meeting with G7 leaders at the resort here at the summit site. It was a 2-hour discussion, a closed-door discussion, leaders talking about everything from war strategy to Ukrainian reconstruction.
It's clear Ukraine still needs help on a global scale, but Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country needs help getting Ukraine's agricultural exports around Russian blockades. Canada is pitching in with $52 million in equipment and technology.
Because Russia is weaponizing the food and particularly destroying the food storages and the logistics, the importance of this financial support and commitment to support Ukraine in movable grain storages is very essential.
Zelenskyy also wants even more sanctions on Russia. Canada moved on that front too, imposing sanctions on a new group of individuals and banning exports of certain kinds of Canadian technology to Russia. And it's no secret that Zelenskyy continues to look for more munitions and weapons from the West. To that end, the U.S. said Monday it will send anti-aircraft systems to Ukraine.
The support of the weapons, the military aid, is now crucial to stop Putin and to stop Russian war, which weaponize food, weaponize energy supply, killing Ukrainians.
G7 leaders, though, are united that there can be no escalation of the conflict beyond Ukraine's borders.
We are also cautious that we will help the Ukraine as much as is possible, but that we also avoid that there will be a big conflict between Russia and NATO.
But G7 leaders also want help from countries that have yet to sanction Russia. And so, the G7 invited the leaders of India, South Africa, and Argentina, 3 big countries that have yet to even condemn Russia's invasion, to ask them to do more to join the West and put more pressure on Vladimir Putin. When Trudeau and Modi met for a brief one-on-one, Russia's invasion was on the agenda.
But there may be more that the G7 can do. There were discussions to get started on a process to cap the price of Russian oil. And that, of course, would have the effect of eliminating some of the revenue that the Putin regime is relying on to prosecute their war in Ukraine. Nitu.
David Akin in Germany. Thanks, David. Those sweeping sanctions have pushed Russia to default on its foreign debt for the first time in more than a century. Russia missed its Sunday night deadline to meet a 30-day grace period on interest payments of more than $100 million. Moscow denies the country is in default, calling the claims unjustified. The Kremlin has the money to pay thanks to oil and gas revenues, but sanctions have frozen its foreign currency reserves abroad. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February, it was clear it wanted more than control of its neighbor. It also targeted cultural assets. The Russian military struck several museums and art galleries. Precious artwork is missing, while other artifacts have been destroyed. Ukrainians say their culture is under attack and they're fighting to save it. Seán O'Shea reports from Ukraine tonight.
For months, Ukraine's stages and theaters have been closed because of war, but slowly they're coming back.
Despite war, we believe that cultural institutions should operate if it's possible. It's most important for the public for them to attend.
In defending their land, Ukrainians are also in a fight to preserve their cultural identity.
War is about identity. It's about Russians' idea that Ukrainian identity does not exist, and Ukrainians do not exist as a separate society.
It's a view openly held by Russia's President Vladimir Putin.
Russian propaganda machine works that Ukraine do not have their culture, they do not have their history, they don't have their national and cultural identity. So it should be destroyed, it should be shelled, it should be looted.
That's what happened in parts of Ukraine since the invasion. Museums and galleries and other national treasures have been targets.
It's obviously a war crime, a crime against humanity.
Ukrainians are resisting to defend their culture, just as their military is resisting to defend the country. This new contemporary art exhibit is provoking Ukrainians to express themselves, including how they feel about the war.
People should feel and should speak about their feelings, and this exhibition is about that.
Outside the recently reopened Opera House in Kyiv on a Saturday afternoon, patrons have come to see the ballet. This woman gets emotional. She says she's here because her grandson's fighting in the war. She needed an escape. Others are making a point of showing defiance.
Also, Russians want to destroy our culture and our language, and we want to do everything to support it, to defend it.
They want to steal everything.
For mezzo-soprano Katerina Zimbaluk, a plea to defend culture and to keep supporting her country.
Ukraine now as a shield of all Europe, because nobody knows if we will not stop Putin here in Ukraine, we don't know how far he can go. He will not stop.
And Ukrainians say they won't stop doing what they can to preserve their culture. Seán O'Shea, Global News, Kharkiv.
NATO says it plans to massively increase its rapid response force from 40,000 troops to more than 300,000. Canada has up to 3,400 Army, Air Force and naval personnel on standby for deployment. Today, NATO also released new defense spending figures, marking the 8th consecutive year of increased spending across European allies and Canada. Last week, Canada committed nearly $5 billion to modernize NORAD defenses. But as our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson reports, there's confusion over where the money is coming from.
The Liberal government's promise to spend $4.9 billion modernizing continental defense was carefully staged on an airfield, complete with a CF-18 fighter jet backdrop. While the look was sharp, the details were not. The minister contradicted herself on the source of funding, first saying it was from the 2022 budget.
Through the $8 billion in the most recent federal budget.
Minutes later, that changed.
On top of the $8 billion in the federal budget.
That would be a lot more money. But within an hour, her office said she had misspoken. National defense sources tell us it wasn't just a muddled public announcement. Even the military didn't know where the money was coming from. And there are concerns it may not be new money at all, but rather funding cut from existing programs, training, and operations. In a stunning admission, Canada's top soldier told the West Bloc even he doesn't know the answer.
I haven't completely figured out myself the source of funds for this, so I can't say definitively where it's coming from. You know, I will say though the announcement was welcome.
For 4 days, Global News has been asking the minister's office to clarify whether the money is new or will be cut from within the department. They have not responded with an answer.
I think increasingly there'd be some concern about us essentially playing a version of a shell game.
The big thing here is the inability of this government to be honest with Canadians about what they're paying for security.
Experts say inflation is putting increasing pressure on the Canadian Armed Forces, who cannot stop training or operating despite the increasing security and financial pressures. all while our NATO allies expect more. Former Defense Minister Peter MacKay says he thinks the government probably plans to put in new money from the budget. But Canada's foot-dragging on defense spending and politically rushed announcements aren't a good look.
Canada will suffer a significant blow to its credibility, a significant undermining of Canada's role in NATO.
Sources with international allies say they are curious to find out more about the funding too, and hope they'll do so at the NATO summit from the Prime Minister. Neithu?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. Turning now to the U.S., where more states continue to ban abortions following the Supreme Court's ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade on Friday in places where trigger laws haven't yet come into effect, like Tennessee. As our Jackson Prosco reports from Nashville, there's an urgency to provide or coordinate services before legal access to abortion is blocked.
The doors opened for the final week of abortion services at the Nashville Planned Parenthood Clinic, where they will stop accepting patients as of Friday. The clinic's website warns that due to recent changes in Tennessee law, they can no longer provide medication or surgical abortion services. They can only help women travel out of state for care.
We don't want anybody to wait and thinking that this is going to get better, because it's only going to get worse, and it's going to get worse really fast.
In Tennessee, the clock is now ticking on a trigger ban of almost all abortions at the end of July. Any day before that, the state's courts could overturn a stay of an existing heartbeat law, banning abortions after 6 weeks.
Nobody's looking at this as a full picture. Abortion is not black or white.
The looming loss of abortion rights prompted Taylor Esche to go public with her own story.
I don't think anybody should feel alone. Abortion is completely normal, it's healthcare, and it should be accessible.
Last summer, Taylor was stunned to learn she was pregnant despite using birth control. At 28 and running her own business, she and her fiancé made the difficult decision to end the pregnancy.
I don't have anybody to cover for me maternity leave wise. I'd have to pay myself that. I have to pay for childcare because I do not intend to stop working. And unfortunately, if I were to have that child, I would have lost everything that I've built.
Stand up, fight back! In post-Roe America, women face a patchwork of bans and choices. Some states have vowed to go so far as to prosecute women who travel for abortions. Others have expanded and protected abortion access in their laws. Advocates for reproductive choice warn many women will be unable to travel and will simply fall through the cracks. In states like Tennessee, they're calling on lawmakers to deal with the consequences of banning abortion.
In this new chapter where people are going to be forced to carry their pregnancies to term or have to leave the state to access care, that we'll have policies here that can actually take care of families. Because we're going to have to.
Here in Nashville, the local district attorney now says he will not prosecute doctors who provide abortions or the women who seek them. And that puts him at direct odds with the state's attorney general, who's actually trying to accelerate the timeline for implementing the state's trigger ban on abortion. Neithu?
Jackson Prosco in Nashville, Tennessee. Thanks, Jackson. Bracing for mayhem on Canada's birthday. Coming up, the concerns about protesters crashing the Canada Day party in Ottawa. Plus, a rare frozen find in Yukon, more than 300 centuries in the making. And NASA's astronomical feat in the land down under.
Three, two, one, go!
A sky-high achievement from down under. NASA just launched a space rocket from a commercial spaceport in Australia, a first for the country and for NASA outside of the U.S. The rocket is carrying scientific equipment that will help study star systems only observable from the southern hemisphere. 2 more launches are planned from the Australian Space Centre for later in July. Ahead of the Canada Day long weekend, Ottawa is preparing for its first celebration of the national holiday since 2019. And while concerts, fireworks, and other activities are on the agenda, the city is also closing roads and calling in reinforcements to keep anti-government protesters from disrupting the capital, like they did in February. Abigail Beeman has more.
Preparations underway for the first almost normal Canada Day celebrations in 3 years.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, it's the first time we've all been together since COVID.
This family from Montreal, Vancouver, and Amsterdam picked Ottawa for a Canada Day reunion. It's Daniel's first time in the capital.
Wow.
Do you want to
it, Daniel.
But with hundreds of thousands expected to descend on the downtown core, there's also some anxiety about so-called freedom protesters among them. This business owner in the tourist popular Byward Market is still deciding whether to open.
It's just a question of how many protesters or that kind of thing they're expecting down here, because we don't like trouble.
There are not going to be warnings and second chances. If the law is broken, regardless who breaks it, there'll be consequences.
Ottawa police are promising swift action for any illegal activity after being widely condemned for not stepping in sooner during the original convoy.
You're not going to be allowed to set up speakers to have a dance party or any sort of tents to be able to camp or have any sort of structures. And we've been very clear on that.
We are not setting up an encampment in the city of Ottawa. We are going to be at a campsite 40 minutes east of the city.
While a key group organizing activities this weekend in various places around Parliament Hill is trying to calm resident anxieties.
We're not monsters like the media is portraying us to be. We're not violent.
There's a whole continuum of violence, and I think what we saw in February in particular was the violence of words, the violence of taunts, the violence of symbols, and I don't know that we're hearing enough from conference organizers to really make it clear that they understand that side.
Alex Neve is a commissioner for the newly launched grassroots Ottawa People's Commission, gathering experiences of those impacted by February's convoy. He says anxiety remains high in the community as Canada Day looms, and people aren't sure exactly what to expect. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Ahead, the terrifying stadium collapse at a Colombian bullfighting event. A dramatic scene at a Colombian bullfighting festival has left at least 4 people dead after a 3-story section of the audience stands gave way. It's unclear what caused the collapse that also trapped and injured hundreds of others. But the improvised stadium held together by bamboo was called unstable by officials. Colombia's president-elect is already urging for a ban to bullfights, noting similar incidents have occurred at such events. Miners digging for gold in Yukon have uncovered something even more remarkable. The mummified baby woolly mammoth was found in the Klondike goldfields nearly a week ago. Geologists believed it died and was frozen in the permafrost during the Ice Age more than 30,000 years ago. It's the first near-complete and best-preserved woolly mammoth discovered in North America. The biggest tournament in tennis stands against Russia. Next, the athletes being served the consequences. More than a dozen of the world's top tennis players definitely won't hold the sport's biggest trophy this year, though. The UK's Wimbledon tournament is well underway, but a ban on Russian and Belarusian athletes has barred them from competing, including the #1 men's player. Of course, the move is a stand against Russia's devastating invasion of Ukraine, but it's not without controversy. Here's Eric Sorensen.
Wimbledon, with its green grass, red strawberries, and all-white dress code for players, can be an escape from the world's turmoil. Not this year. The biggest stars are playing, but not the Russians. To blunt the propaganda benefits that Vladimir Putin and Russia derive from their international sports figures, Wimbledon has banned players from Russia and Belarus.
Government, industry, sport and creative institutions are all playing their part in efforts to limit Russia's global influence.
But the men's and women's tennis tours oppose the move, believing individual players should not be targeted. So they stripped Wimbledon of the points normally awarded from the tournament.
My honest opinion, I don't think it was a good idea to ban the Russian players to play. I think Medvedev is the best we have in our sport right now.
Daniil Medvedev is the top-ranked men's player in the world. He's not at Wimbledon, but like many Russian athletes, is careful about criticizing Russia or the measures to punish Russia.
I always say that I have to follow the rules. And where I can play, I'm going to play. I'm going to try to play my best.
Russians can play at the upcoming U.S. and Canadian Opens. Ukrainian player Elena Svitolina wants greater support from sports governing bodies.
Our sports is thrown back like 10 years minimum because all the infrastructure been damaged or completely destroyed.
One academic says international sports cannot divorce politics from sports and have failed when trying to be neutral.
In trying to maintain neutrality, it really played into Putin's hands. The institutions, the organizations that put on these events have to be cognizant of international affairs.
The NHL is one international league that did not look to ban Russians, such as Alex Ovechkin, who opposes the war but has openly supported Vladimir Putin. For the lone Russian on the champion Colorado Avalanche, there is one setback. Valery Nichushkin will not be allowed to take the Stanley Cup and show it off back in Russia, as his countrymen have done in the past. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A Newfoundland and Labrador woman who helped people find strength in song has passed away.
This choir is special, I suppose. If you love to sing or want to sing with people, you're in.
We introduced you to Helen Murphy back in 2017 when she was a global national everyday hero. She was the volunteer conductor of the Stella Circles Inclusion Choir, harnessing the power of music to help people on the edge of society find their voice. Some choir members credit her for saving their lives. Helen Murphy was 76 years old. That is Global National for this Monday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.